Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part there of the 29th of April 2024. This should be relatively quick. There's not too much news out there with regard to military aid and equipment going to Ukraine or from inside Russia. We'll start with this interesting bit of news that's come out today, that the USA has purchased 81 Soviet-era combat airplanes from Kazakhstan. They may be handed over to Ukraine, according to the Kiev Post. The publication emphasizes that the planes aren't in a condition unsuitable for combat use. They can be used for spare parts or as decoys at airfields. So these are not planes that can be flown, but planes that can be cannibalized. Now, there's a little bit more detail here. In October, Kazakhstan offered 117 old Soviet-era combat aircraft for sale by auction, and the US has bought 81 of them through offshore intermediaries. So it's not like Kazakhstan went to the US or the US necessarily went to Kazakhstan, but it went up for auction and the US won the auction. This included MiG-31s, MiG-27s, MiG-29s, Su-24s. I don't know what the brackets $1.5 million means. PS spare parts and as decoys only. But then Kazakhstan, so this is Nexta reporting that Kazakhstan's denied reports about the sale of its airplanes to the AFU or USA. Representatives of the state enterprise Kazspets Sexport said that they held a tender for the sale of aircraft only for Kazakhstani firms with the appropriate license with the condition of compulsory liquidation. Foreign companies were not allowed to participate. So something could be going on here. It could be that one of those Kazakhstani firms was a sort of shell company for the US. I don't know. But there are claims and counterclaims regarding that. Now, it would be super useful if the Ukrainians could have access to that amount of airframes to cannibalize, because at the end of the day, spare parts will be very thin on the ground, and that's a real big haul of aircraft. It won't go down too well with Russia if that's the case. So I don't know if there are some kind of shenanigans going on behind the scenes as to whether that will take place or not. Talking about airframes, this is a Ukrainian Su-27 fighter jet with a new onboard customized iPad. The usage of these tablets is confirmed by the US Deputy Secretary of Defense LaPlante. Because of it, the old Soviet-style fighters are able to take up Western weapons, navigate better, and display more and critical data during missions. Interesting that these iPads are just able to help them out somewhat. Let's have a look at this footage then. So this is from the Telegraph, quote, Ukrainian pilots are using iPads to launch sophisticated Western missiles from their Soviet-era fighter jets. A recent video released by the Ukrainian Air Force shows a pilot flying a Soviet Su-27 fitted with an iPad in the cockpit. So here we go. I'm sure we're going to hear some loud music. And why can't I not find any controls on there? That's really annoying. We'll go back to the beginning, and there we go. Nope, disappeared again. So here we go, and you'll see just for a short period of time, I think, the iPad in view. There we go. So that's the iPad there. It's quite dark. You can't really see it against the background, but it's an iPad in front of him. Whoop-de-woo, he's got an iPad. But it shows that there is this integration between Western and Soviet technologies that allow weapon systems to be used on older frames, and that would include things like the Buk launcher being able to launch, so that's a surface-to-air missile launcher, being able to launch RIM-7 Sea Sparrow missiles, as well as something like a Su-27 be able to fire Western weapons and have more data on board. Okay, French aid to Ukraine talks a little bit more about this Larranae jet-propelled drone, or actually it's a Velociv 330 or Veloc 330. A few more details. I showed you the video of this yesterday. It's a fast-moving loitering, well, not necessarily loitering munition, actually, a fast-moving drone. The Veloc 330 is equipped with a core generating charge to defeat the active defences of armoured vehicles and a navigation system without GPS, and therefore insensitive to jamming offered by Trac. According to KNDS France, which is a Nexter company. The Veloce 330 should have a range of 80 kilometers and an autonomy of 3 hours. Quote, its reusability also allows it to carry out reconnaissance missions thanks to an optronic ball that can detect a vehicle at a distance of 15 kilometers during the day and 3 kilometers at night. In the logic of things, the Larinai project, like Colibri, should be tested in Ukraine. The Ministry of Armed Forces has nothing to lose and everything to gain, and so does Ukraine. This is what we see an awful lot of, which is Western arms manufacturers and researchers go, right, here's a new product. We need to battle test it, and normally they go take it out into the field and like shoot stuff at it or get it to fly at things and blow up tanks that are just standing still, and quite as good as, do you know what, taking it to a war zone and testing it in a war zone. And I'll tell you who will be willing partners in that. The Ukrainians. They'll be like, yep, we'll test that. Yep, we'll use that. Thank you very much. And so it's really valuable for these arms manufacturers to get that proper battle testing done and make their goods fit for purpose and as good as they possibly can be. And of course, Ukraine are going to be willing partners, as mentioned. Now, I'm not sure about this. This is Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin stating about ATACMS. So it's up to them how and when they use it. And our hopes is that they'll create some pretty good effects. I thought when I heard that yesterday, it was a little bit undersold. I don't want pretty good effects. I want extraordinarily brilliant effects. Thank you very much, of the ATACMS on the Russians. But some people are saying that, as here cuffs off, that he's allowing ATACMS to be used into Russian territory. I don't read it as that. Because we have had previous from Jake Sullivan that actually they shouldn't be used into Russian territory. So here's the actual quote. Question, if I may follow, officials had expressed before concerns at Russia that the Ukraine may try to fire ATACMS at Russia, or that there weren't enough in US stockpiles. Did either of those affect your decision to provide the long-range ATACMS? Austin then replies, well, first of all, as you know, I always have a concern about the United States having the capability to defend itself and to also support our operational plans. And I can tell you that we are comfortable that we are in a good place and will remain in a good place. So in other words, giving ATACMS to Ukraine isn't going to affect the US's ability to defend itself. Okay. Over in 2 years' time, things change, More munitions are created and that sort of business. So we are in a good place. We'll remain in a good place. And I think the capability that Ukraine will have is a good capability. Okay. Then on to the part of the question, which is the officials had expressed before concerns that Russia and that the Ukraine may try to fire ATACMS at Russia, or that there weren't enough. So at Russia. So into Russia or at Russia. So they are firing them at Russia, but in Ukraine. So the question, my opinion is the question isn't quite clear enough. But he says, so it's up to them how and when they use it. And our hopes is that they'll create some pretty good effects with that and other things. Does that give them permission to use them into Russia? This won't be where the US gives permission. There'll be explicit things said behind closed doors, but I'm not sure that you can conclude that they are allowed to use these into Russia, but you could also say it's probably not clear enough. And I would just err on the side of Jake Sullivan here. Not that that's how it should be, but that's probably how it is. Latvia donates energy equipment to Ukraine after Russian attacks on infrastructure. So we'd heard that this was going to happen. A number of countries have said, look, you can help yourselves to our now defunct older Soviet-era power plants and see if you can pillage some of the goods that can keep your power plants online. Latvian state-owned company Latvenergo provided Ukraine with equipment to restore the energy system after Russian attacks, the Delphi media outlet reported yesterday. Next to the higher voltage transformer previously used at the Riga hydroelectric power plant, Ukraine also reportedly received 60 metric tons of transformer oil and an air compressor. So good news there. Thank you, Latvia. Now, here we have the claim that, according to, I presume, Ukrainian Air Force here, Poland is capable of protecting skies over western Ukraine, but political will is needed. And of course, this is the case. Of course, they have the ability with Patriots to protect some of Ukrainians' territory if they place those Patriots close to the Ukrainian border. Poland is technically capable of protecting the skies over Ukraine's western regions with its air defense, but this requires political will, according to Air Force spokesperson Ilya Yevlash today. That'd be brilliant. I think it'd be fantastic if Poland, and I've long said this, and I'd include Romania down by the Danube River as well, where there's been some drones landing in Romanian territory, and we've seen missiles go into Polish territory and indeed be shot down inside Polish territory. It would be great if Poland could say, right, in order to stop those missiles coming anywhere near our borders, we are going to shoot down Russian missiles if they get within, whatever figure, I don't know, 50 kilometers of the Polish border. Then that would be super, because and they're saying, look, we're just doing this to protect our own land. And that means that the Russian missiles would not be able to enter that airspace, and that would really, really help the Ukrainians. But I don't know if there is, whether the Russians would see that as escalator. Of course they would, but whether they'd actually do anything about that, who knows? But certainly that's what I would want to see Poland do. And then finally, just an infographic here. The number of defense companies in Ukraine has doubled in 2 years. The defense industry share of the economy has grown tremendously. This is what Russia's doing, and this is what Ukraine needs to do. And indeed, they are trying to do that, which is have a war economy. So your GDP is pretty healthy. As we see some from Russia, and this is why people like the IMF saying, oh, Russia's growth is actually on track to be pretty good this year, and etc., etc. Well, that growth is there because they're just making tanks and IFVs and artillery shells. So their gross domestic product, what they produce, what their kind of economy is worth, if you like, on a yearly basis, looks good, but it's kind of artificial because they're not making all these other stuff, and they're making some very expensive bits of kit that they're just going to send to there to get blown up and then make more of it. It's not particularly sustainable as soon as the war finishes. It's not a healthy economy that is on a war footing, but it is one that can sustain itself, certainly in the short to medium term. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the Ukrainian defense industry has been developing frantically and bolstering the economy during the war. The share of the defense industry in real GDP growth increased by 15 times. In 2023, the defense industry accounted for almost a third of GDP growth. And let's see if we can have a look at this. So 2021, that was a share of the share of GDP growth, the defense industry, and that was 0.1% of the growth. 0.1% of GDP growth. I'm not sure the terminologies here. So the GDP growing 3.1%. It could be actually. That's not 0.1% of 3.4%. That's 0.1% real GDP growth. So in 2023, that moved to 1.5%, which is indeed a 15 times growth. And GDP growth has moved to 5.3%. 2022, of course, it took an absolute hammering, and GDP would have gone right down. The number of defense companies doubled. New technologies, products, and exports are driving economic growth. So I presume that is 200 defense companies, and now there are 500 defense companies. The number of employees at defense companies is growing. The defense industry creates new jobs and contributes to the budget with taxes. Of course, there is very much a case of, but it's also costing. Well, not necessarily, actually. So a lot of these will be private concerns where they are getting contracts from the government. So there is a lot of expenditure going from the government. So they are getting some back in taxes. But, there is very much the sense that this is being propped up. The industries and the economy is being propped up by the government, and the government needs an injection of money, which is why, the EU, through their Ukraine facility, gave $1.5 billion just now. And of course, a lot of that will find its way into the military industrial complex to provide weapons for their own armed forces, and that will stimulate the economy. And of course, these things are money multipliers, so it's not like that money just gets spent on weapons and then those weapons get used and they need to spend more on that gets spent on the weapons, but that money goes to the wages in some part of the workers there, and there will be more people working, so the more people getting paid out of that money, and they will spend their money on, other things. The supply chain will do well. The sandwich makers, the local industries around wherever these manufacturing plants are will do well, and it's your Keynesian growth there, stimulated by the government. But again, as I've said with Russia, how sustainable is that going into the long term? The defense industry works in close cooperation with other sectors. The production of equipment and weapons requires resources from many industries. Kind of what I was just saying there. So metalworking, paint, navigation system, optical sites, software, cables, and other goes into making a bit of kit, right? But then of course it's all those other things like the workers who might not otherwise. So especially if you're taking jobs, if you're giving jobs to people who would have been unemployed, that's really good because you're taking them off welfare. So you're not then paying their unemployment, but then they are getting paid by you, but you're getting some of that back in taxes. And I don't know, it depends where these jobs are coming from. And you then have to look at, so in Russia, the problem is there's a labour shortage, and that means that there's a wage increase because of that. That might be the case. I don't know about labour shortage in Ukraine. Someone else might be able to help me on that. But we have had a lot of people escaping from Ukraine because they didn't want to be called up into the army. You've had a lot of women and men leaving. So I wonder what effect that will have on the economy and on labour shortage, and therefore on wage price spirals that you might get, inflationary pressures, etc., etc. So anyway, it's good news that the defense economy is doing well in Ukraine. There's no doubt about that, because you'd rather the Ukrainians get those contracts than outside military industrial corporate entities get those contracts, because obviously if you're French you would like it to be French, and British you like it to be British that get that money. But actually, if you're Ukrainian and looking at the sustainability of Ukraine, ideally Ukraine gets the contracts, makes their own stuff, becomes more defense independent, security independent, and also helps out their economy, etc., etc. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care. Speak to you soon.